When you define a VLAN in network controller, if you want to isolate the VLAN with all existing VLANs, you have two options: guest network or isolate network. You may wonder how they work differently, what causes the different behaviors, especially when you add Wi-Fi as a factor, whether your decision should be impacted. So in this video, let's talk about these two options in details. In my lab environment, I have a UX3 Pro as the router, two UniFi switches, and a cloud key to run the network controller. Then I have two UniFi access points. We will compare two VLANs. One has the isolate network enabled, the other one has the guest network enabled. We will compare their different communications with different devices, for example, within the same VLAN with other VLANs, or whether they can access internet when the clients are all LAN clients. Then we will talk about Wi-Fi. When the hotspot portal is disabled, whether the two different VLANs, their Wi-Fi clients, are able to access internet. The third part, we will enable hotspot portal. Let's see whether the internet access behaves differently. I have two VLANs defined, 80 and 90. Let's check 80 first. Advanced section, you can see I enabled the isolate network. That's the only special setting. By the way, the allow internet access is checked by default. And for VLAN 90, the only difference is here, I take the guest network. Once you enable the guest network, the isolate network option is disabled. So you cannot change this one anymore. This makes sense. This is the super easy setting in the UniFi network controller. But what's the difference between these two after you enable the different options? From the user interface, you can check the differences in the firewall rules. Go to security, firewall rules. Under the LAN, you can see there's a new firewall rule generated. Just by reading the description, it doesn't mention what's the VLAN ID, but in the details, you can see the source IP address is 80 something. That's for VLAN 80, which is the isolate network we enabled. What this firewall rule says is it is LAN in, it will drop all communications from VLAN 80 to all other VLANs. When I say all, I mean all. See, it includes the default network, all other VLANs managed by the router, and even the VLAN 66 and 88 managed by layer 3 switch. And it even includes VLAN 80 and VLAN 90. In the future, if you add any new VLANs, even after you create the VLAN 80, the isolate network, the system will automatically add that subnet to this firewall rule. It's completely automatic. So once you create an isolate network, you don't need to change it anymore. Very convenient, right? This is the firewall rule for VLAN 80, which is the isolate network. About the guest network, it is also achieved by using firewall rules, but it's under different section. Ubiquiti puts the guest network specific firewall rules under guest, and you can see a whole bunch of firewall rules. We can briefly check them. For example, it allows DNS, it allows hotspot portal, it will block access to other VLANs, access to VPN servers, a lot of restrictions. On the surface, it seems these two types of networks are achieved in totally different approaches, but to better understand how these two sets of firewall rules work, we need to go to the backend. Let's check what's generated in the backend for these firewall rules. In the lower part terminal, let me SSH into the UniFi router. Run the command IP tables, list the content of the tables. There are a lot of rules in the IP tables, but in the diagram, just to speed up our reading, I picked the major part of the isolate network rules and the guest network rules so that we can quickly talk about them. For example, for the isolate network, as illustrated in the diagram, it's within the Ubiquiti OS LAN in in user. Let me find it. Yeah, it's here. So see, it will drop all from anywhere to anywhere as long as the source match this one and the destination match this one. What's within this two match set? Let me show you. So for the source match set, let's see what's inside the isolated subnets. Okay, you can see it's defined by the two subsets. Then let's drill down to see the IPv4 subsets. It's very easy. See, it's just one subnet for VLAN 80. So in a similar way, let me show the destination, which is named as local network. Okay, in a similar way, let's drill down to the IPv4 subset. So see the list of subnets, they match the one we see in the user interface. For VLAN 80, which is the isolate network, the firewall rules are very straightforward. Of course, someone may have questions already. For example, the destination includes the VLAN 80 itself. How can it be possible, right? We will test it out later. Let's briefly check the guest network IP table rules. So in the diagram, I show you the guest network IP table related rules. So basically the entry point is the Ubiquiti OS guest in user. See, it's here, guest in user. See the first two rules. First one TCP, the second one UDP. Basically the return means it will finish this chain and go back to the previous caller chain, which means it will allow this communication. So just by looking into the source and destination, you may be surprised. It seems it will allow all the TCP UDP communications. If you continue reading, you can see here it says only if the destination port is the main. The main means DNS, meaning port 53. What the first two rules really mean is it allows DNS, just like what you see in the first firewall rule for VLAN 90, right? We don't have time to go through all of them, but just by reading the match set, you can already guess each rule is for what purpose. One of the most important rule is this particular one. See, it will jump to a new chain with this name. Let's find out what's the details for this new chain. Yeah, it's here. See, for this chain, it only has two rules. First one is allow if this match set is successfully matched to the source, otherwise it will drop. Just by reading the name, you can already guess this match set means if your current user is authorized. Because we are talking about guest network, only if you are authorized, you will meet the condition for this match set, then your traffic will be allowed. Before moving on to testing the different connection scenarios, let's address one confusion some of you may already have. Let's check this chain again, the forward in user. As we mentioned previously, for isolate network and guest network, they take different branches from this chain, right? So in this chain, we have the WAN in user, LAN in user, multiple ones, and at the end, we have the guest in user. You may wonder how the system decides, okay, this is for VLAN 80 isolate network, so it will take the LAN in user chain, and then the other traffic, it is for VLAN 90, it's guest network, so we'll take this one. How the system even knows that and make that decision, right? And more importantly, if the system will execute all of this in a sequential way, that means if you have a guest network traffic, it will go all the through from the top to the end. The LAN firewall rules will also be executed. Is that really true for guest network? Are you able to even create firewall rules in LAN in for guest network? We will test it. To answer the initial confusion, how the system knows, okay, this traffic is for LAN, that is for WAN, and the other one is for guest. Let me run the IP table command again, but with the V parameter. Basically, I want to display more details, okay? You have more columns. So let's find the same chain, the forward in user again. Okay, it is here, forward in user. So you can see there are packets bytes. This means how many traffic has already gone through this particular chain. More columns here about the interface. This column answers the initial confusion. Only if the interface is the one part, it will run this chain, the one chain. Only if the interface is for the bridge for VLAN default, it will run this chain. So see, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chains with the exact same name, which means they have the same rules, right? The only difference is in the interface part. The in interface has to be the corresponding VLAN. For example, this one is for VLAN 10. This is for the layer 3 switch VLANs, and this is for our isolated network, VLAN 80. VLAN 80 traffic will go into this one, and it will not execute the guest chain for VLAN 80 because for guest chain, the interface has to be bridge 90 for VLAN 90. So in this way, the traffic is separated and they won't go through the wrong chains. To validate it, let me go to the firewall rules under the LAN part. Remember, all the firewall rules for VLAN 90, the guest network, are under the guest, right? But let me go to LAN anyway. Try to create a firewall rule for VLAN 90. Okay, create one. Allow 90 to default. For guest network, it's not allowed to access other VLANs, right? But am I able to create a exception rule in LAN in so that I can open up the connection? So let me do that. Allow source network VLAN 90 destination default. That's it. Yeah, I am able to add the rule without any problem. If you go to this newly generated LAN in user chain, the very first rule is allow from any to any if the source is from the bridge 90, which means VLAN 90, and if the destination is to bridge 0, which means default network. So our firewall rule did lead to a new IP table rule, and it is in the LAN in user. If we find the forward in user chain, theoretically, just by looking into this forward in user chain, yes, you have a new rule in the LAN in user chain, but none of the LAN in user chains here has the bridge 90 as the interface, which means theoretically this firewall rule will never be effective to VLAN 90. We can test it out. See here, I have a virtual machine in VLAN 90, right? Remember, this firewall rule is supposed to allow the connection between VLAN 90 and the VLAN default, right? So let me ping a virtual machine in default network. It is still not pingable. If you look back to the left side, because yes, you have a new rule, but the new rule is never applied to BR90, so it will never be effective. Okay, the ubiquitous way is it separate the LAN with guest. So if you have a guest network, only the firewall rules under guest will be effective. Vice versa, if you have a isolated network, the firewall rules in guest will not apply. Okay, now let's move on to the connection testing. Let's start with the clients are all on the LAN. There's no Wi-Fi involved. From the isolated network, VLAN 80, let me ping the device 2 from device 1. Okay, pingable, no problem. For VLAN 90, the guest network, ping device 2 from device 1. Okay, also pingable. So for both, they behave the same. There's no surprise. The reason is just by using firewall rules, you cannot prevent the communications within the same VLAN. It doesn't matter whether it's guest network or isolated network, they behave the same. But what if we ping a device outside of their respective VLANs? From the VLAN 80 device, ping the default network device. Not pingable. From the guest network, do the same thing. Also not pingable. This is also expected because for guest network or isolated network, there are corresponding firewall rules to prevent the inter-VLAN communications, right? No surprise. The difference for guest network and isolated network for LAN clients comes to internet access. From the isolated network, VLAN 80, let me first dig x.com. Okay, the DNS works. And then from VLAN 90, let me dig x.com. It also works, even though it's just guest network. Why it works? If you check the firewall rules for VLAN 90, the very first rule is to allow public DNS. So that's why the dig also works. But if you want to ping the same domain name, let's say from VLAN 80, yeah, it's pingable. Then what if I do it in VLAN 90? No, it's not pingable. Why is that? If you go to the VLAN 90, you can see we do select allow internet access. If you are interested, you may watch a video in my channel. I talk about why by default the guest network doesn't have internet access and how the hotspot portal works for guest network. Even though here I cannot directly ping it, if I go to browser, then try to access google.com, see what happened? I was redirected to the UniFi guest Wi-Fi, which is the hotspot portal. Why this happens? Remember, we are only talking about the LAN client. We are not using Wi-Fi at all. Let's try to understand what happened. In the left side, I'm already in the SSH session to the UX3 Pro, the gateway. Let me run this command to show you the process named as redirector. It is running and using this configuration file. Let me show you the file. You can see the redirector is enabled. The URL is this one. See the right side, the client machine. This is the exact same URL. And the .1.232 is the IP address for my cloud key. So the hotspot portal or guest portal is running together with the network controller. So in my case, it's running on the cloud key. The system automatically redirected the internet traffic if it's HTTP to the hotspot portal. Even though now this client is not on Wi-Fi, it's just a LAN client. Hotspot portal is still effective because in the router, we have the redirector running as well. You may know in each access point, it is also running for Wi-Fi clients. Okay, so now we know why we have this guest portal shown. But before I input my password, get authenticated, let's check why currently this client doesn't have internet access. Let me show the IP tables again. See this chain, authorized guest network. It is using this IP set to see whether a given client is authenticated or not. So let me display the content of this IP set. See, now it has 0 members. So that's why this client need to be authenticated, right? But what if I input the password, click login? See, the browser automatically redirect the page to what I wanted to access, google.com. Then in the SSH, let me show the exact same IP set again. So now you see it has 1 member with this MAC address. This is the MAC address for this LAN client. Going forward, before this IP set expires, this LAN client will be able to access internet without being redirected to the guest portal anymore. So this is interesting, right? Even for a LAN guest network client, the guest portal, the hotspot portal is still effective. But the inconvenient part is if you are familiar with the Wi-Fi guest portal, you may know right after you redirect to the Wi-Fi SSID, you will see a automatic browser pop-up leading you to the hotspot portal. Apparently, it didn't happen in my case for the LAN client. I need to manually open a browser, try to access a internet address. If you're interested why the difference between the LAN client and the Wi-Fi client, you may check a video in my channel. Now the client is authenticated. This time, if I ping the same IP address again, remember before the authentication to hotspot portal, I couldn't ping this domain name, right? Now let me ping it. Yeah, it's pingable. Why? Because this client has internet access now. So we are clear about the LAN scenario. Now let's move on to Wi-Fi. First, let's talk about if you have hotspot portal disabled for both VLAN 80 and VLAN 90 Wi-Fi SSIDs. Let me show you what I mean. In the UniFi network controller, I created a SSID for VLAN 80, and you can see I don't have the hotspot portal enabled, and of course in the security I do have authentication enabled, and for VLAN 90 SSID I also don't have hotspot portal enabled. And normally if you have a guest network, you can choose to have the security wide open so that you can utilize the hotspot portal. You can do like this, just like normal SSID, you can still use security and you can choose the regular authentication way, right? This is what I'm doing now, even for the guest network SSID. At this moment, neither of the two SSIDs has the hotspot portal enabled. Okay, so now in the lower part of the screen, I have two Mac computers. For the first one, you can see I'm trying to connect to the Wi-Fi for the isolate network, VLAN 80. Let me do it. Okay, connected. There's no extra pop-up. If I try to ping a internet domain name, x.com, yes, it's pingable. It has access to internet automatically. But for the right side, Wi-Fi client for VLAN 90, the guest network, if I do the same thing, join, it's connected, and then immediately you see a automatic pop-up for guest network, even though I do not have the hotspot portal enabled. That's weird, right? Let's try to understand why this happens. So from the Wi-Fi client, we see this guest portal redirection. Of course, the first thing we think, okay, maybe the access point redirected, right? Then let me SSH into the access point, U6 Pro. Let me run similar command as I ran previously in the router. I want to see the process named as redirector, because this process will redirect the HTTP traffic to the guest portal. But interestingly, there's no such process running in the access point, because in the SSID setting, we don't have hotspot portal enabled. That's why the redirector is not running on the AP at all. But why we still see the guest portal? That's because, remember previously, for the LAN connection scenarios, we do have the redirector running in the router in UXG Pro. So when the client is trying to access internet, the traffic at the end will go via the router. So the redirector will still redirect the traffic. So that's unexpected, even though you don't have the hotspot portal enabled, and even though you already input the Wi-Fi password for this SSID, the system still redirect you to the portal. So then let me authenticate to it. Yeah, I'm in. See, it's success. Now this computer should have complete internet access. Let me try to ping x.com. Yes, it's pingable. Another thing we want to test is whether the Wi-Fi client, they are able to connect to each other. So because now I only have two Mac computer, the left side one is already connected to VLAN 80. For the right side one, let me change the Wi-Fi connection to connect to VLAN 80 as well. Okay, connected. So we can validate in the right side the IP address. Okay, then in the left side, let me ping the right side. Yeah, it is pingable. So for VLAN 80 Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi clients are still able to communicate with each other. Now let me connect both Mac machines to the VLAN 90 SSID. See, for the right side machine, because I already went through the guest portal, got authenticated, so this time it didn't ask me, right? But the left side is the first time for this machine to connect to the guest network SSID, so I need to do the authentication. Okay, connected. Then let me ping the left side machine from the right side. See, it is pingable. So when we do not have the hotspot portal enabled on the SSID setting, the guest network Wi-Fi clients are still able to communicate with each other even though they are in the guest network, even though they are on Wi-Fi. Okay, this is another interesting result. Now we are done with this scenario. Let's move on to the third one, which is the typical setting for guest network Wi-Fi, which is we have the hotspot portal enabled. Let's enable the hotspot portal in both SSIDs. Start with the isolate network one, enable, and you can see right after you enable hotspot portal, the security protocol becomes wide open because it doesn't make sense you want user to input two different passwords, right? Apply changes. Then for VLAN 90, the guest network, change the same thing. Apply changes. Before connecting to the newly changed SSID, let me first go to the hotspot portal in UniFi network controller and go to the hotspot guests. Then let me remove all the existing client so that we have a fresh start. Because if I continue now, those machines won't show up the guest portal anymore because they were already authenticated. So let me unauthorize them one by one. Now we have a fresh start. In the left side Mac Mini, let me connect to the isolate network, VLAN 80. See, it's connected and I don't see the hotspot portal pop up even though I enabled hotspot portal. Then let me see whether it has access to internet. Let me ping x.com. It cannot ping x.com. Okay, then what if I launch a browser? Let me try to access google.com. See, it says connection is not safe, so I can force to visit this website. See, this is the weird and confusing situation. Just by looking at the IP address, I know it is trying to access the hotspot portal because this is the IP address for my cloud key, right? But you can see it's trying and trying, but still cannot make the connection possible. Why is that? Remember, this is VLAN 80, right? It is isolate network. The connection to VLAN default is forbidden. That's why it cannot connect to the hotspot portal. So basically now the device is stuck here. It cannot proceed. It cannot get authorized to the hotspot portal, so it will never get access to internet. That's a horrible situation. It should be avoided. This happens to the Wi-Fi SSID for the isolate network if I enable the hotspot portal. Okay, then switch to the guest network. Connect to this SSID. See, it show up the guest portal. Remember last time when we validate the redirector process in the AP, we didn't find it because we didn't enable the hotspot portal, right? This time we already enable it. Let's check the process again inside the AP. The exact same command to check redirector. See, this time is different. We do have this process running. It does use this configuration file to enable the reflector. That's why now in the right side, when I try to connect to the VLAN 90 SSID, I see this hotspot portal because the AP, not the router. The AP redirects the HTTP traffic to the hotspot portal. Okay, and the last thing I want to check is in UniFi network controller, I go to the SSID for VLAN 90. See the description here. By default, portal guest will be isolated from other guests. Let me validate it. So in the right side, let me connect to the hotspot portal first. Okay, connected. And in the left side, let me switch to VLAN 90 as well. Okay. Connected. Then in the Wi-Fi details, I can get the IP address for the two clients, right? Then in the right side, let me ping the left side. According to this description by Ubiquiti, I shouldn't be able to ping the left side. Let me try it. Okay, it is correct. I cannot. Then try it from the left side. Yeah, the same result. I cannot. This is a miracle, right? Remember, they are in the same VLAN. And you may know for Wi-Fi, I can enable the client device isolation on the AP. But for this situation, I didn't enable that setting. Then why the two Wi-Fi clients cannot communicate with each other? Let's find it out. This time in the access point, let me run the EB table command. When we SSH'd into the UniFi router, UXG Pro, we run the IP tables, right? The IP tables are used to support the firewall rules for traffic between different VLANs. But here, I'm checking the EB tables inside the access point. These rules, you are going to see, they apply to the traffic within the same bridge, the same VLAN. And it also has a lot of rules. Let's check the ones we are interested in. See the very first part, the chain for pre-routing. So for different interfaces, it has different rules. This already explains why for VLAN 80, when we connect to the Wi-Fi, we were also redirected to the hotspot portal, because see here, for VLAN 80, it will jump to guest in, then the redirection will happen. Here, let's focus on VLAN 90. So for VLAN 90, it will jump to guest in, and this is guest in chain. It will enable the access to the access point just to visit the hotspot portal, right? So here you may ask, okay, the same rule will also apply to VLAN 80, but why for VLAN 80 we couldn't visit the hotspot portal? Because for VLAN 80, the firewall rules also apply. Even though here it allows the access, later the traffic will be dropped by the firewall rule, right? Okay, so let's continue looking. So you can see this particular rule explains why for VLAN 90, the two clients cannot communicate with each other because the traffic is dropped. Why the traffic is dropped? Because they meet the condition that they belong to the guest restricted IP set. Then what's guest restricted in the UniFi network controller? Let me go to hotspot portal setting. In the setting part, there's a section called post authorization restriction, which is for, okay, you entered correct password in hotspot portal. Now you gain the access to internet. Even after that, there is still restriction, which means you are not allowed to access this subnets. Our VLAN 90 subnets belongs to this one, right? That's why this restriction apply, because internally it has this EB table rule. That's why even though these two clients, they belong to the same VLAN 90, and on the access point, we didn't enable the client device isolation, they still cannot communicate with each other due to this EB table rule. Okay, I hope it's clear. I believe now we have finished all the three scenarios. This is a super long video. I didn't expect that, but hopefully it can help you understand the difference or similarity between the isolate network and guest network settings in UniFi network controller. Okay, thanks for watching.